Hello, welcome back to the Spectrasonics Omnisphere tutorial. Today we're dealing with LFOs. Now LFO stands for Low Frequency Oscillator. It's a very fancy term for what's fundamentally a very simple thing. And they share a very close relationship with envelopes. The two do very similar jobs in slightly different respects. Whereas with an envelope, we dealt with those in the last couple of videos. Envelopes are all about going on a journey from the start to an end. Now, in Omnisphere, you can loop envelopes, but if we put that aside and treat them as a one-way street, then it's easy for you to visualize the kind of job an envelope wants to do. You press a note on the keyboard, it fades in gradually, it does something for a period of time, and then it fades away gently, and the job is done. With LFOs, the oscillator aspect of that title is telling you that they're going to do something periodically. So, for instance, if you ought to apply vibrato to a pitch, that's the periodic increasing and decreasing of pitch. That's what vibrato is. Tremolo is the periodic increase and decrease of volume of a note. This is a situation confusing for millions of guitarists around the world because about 70 years ago, the Fender Guitar Company mistakenly labelled their vibrato arm tremolo arm and forever caused confusion between the two. So here we have our LFO, and today we're going to do both of those effects. Let's pick pitch first, and we're going to periodically vary the pitch of our simple sawtooth tone with an LFO. So the way we're going to do that is to right click on the transposed on the coarse knob, which allows us to vary our pitch. And I'm going to say modulate it with an LFO. Now, the currently selected LFO, you see them down here, there are 8 of them, and we currently have LFO number 1 selected, which means that LFO 1 has now been assigned to that control. And just as when we were talking about the envelopes, I'm trying to avoid a deep investigation of the modulation pages. That's going to come in the next video. But today we're just concentrating on the LFO aspect of it. But you can see that the LFO1 has been mapped to the coarse pitch control. So now when I play a note, we're going to get some pitch variance. Now by default, this depth knob is set all the way up, so the pitch variance is spectacular. If I bring the pitch control right down, it's much easier to hear and see exactly what it's doing. And that's it in its simplest form. That's what an LFO does. It periodically varies one of the controls in your synthesizer. So don't get too worried about the technical kind of sounding term. It's not daunting or complicated in any way. Of course, in true Omnisphere fashion, they throw the kitchen sink at the LFOs, so let's have a look at all of the various things that we can do. Firstly, we can change the shape. At the moment, we have a sine wave oscillator, but we have all of these various options available to us. If I pick a square, that basically gives you a kind of on-off effect, because a square wave, as the name implies, and as you can see visually, it's either at maximum or at minimum. And so now we're going to get 2 distinct tones. And the distance between those 2 tones is going to be determined by the depth knob. So don't get too worried about, hang on a minute, that's not an octave, or that's not 2 octaves, or that's not some fixed amount of variance. I want you to treat these things like control voltages. That's an analog term from the world of modular synthesis, where we're basically applying a change, an amount of change to an effect somewhere in the synthesizer. And it's up to us how much change, how much control we apply to that thing. That's what our depth knob does. So turn depth all the way down, and we're once again left with a single pitch. Because the LFO, while it's still working in the background, it's still doing exactly the same thing. It's having all, well, in this case, no effect whatsoever on the target, which is the pitch coarse knob. As I begin to turn depth up, we start hearing those ever increasing steps. Let's have a talk about those two different notes. What are they in relation to our original note? If I turn depth all the way down again, I'm currently playing C4, see it on the tuner. If I increase the depth a little bit, it really doesn't matter how much. Let's have a look at what the two new notes are that we're playing. It's an E4 and an A flat 3. So it doesn't matter whether they're sharp or flat. The important thing is that one of those notes is higher than our original note and one of them is lower. That's because the LFO is currently what's called bipolar, which means its center point is in the middle of the graph, and everything above is an additional positive control voltage, but we can also have negative control voltages. Now we can make all the LFOs on Omnisphere bipolar or unipolar, which means that all of their effects are only going to be positive. And we do that with, it's an almost invisible little button. There's a plus sign in the top right hand corner of this box here. You can also see it as it happens. I've not talked about this modulation page very much, but when you're dealing with LFOs, it's also in this little button down here. If I click, we get a plus sign, and now unipolar has been highlighted. Let's have a listen to what the two notes are now. E4 and C4. So on and off. No modulation, C4, modulation, E4. So now every single one of these depth changes is always going to have a positive and only a positive effect on the pitch. It's going to increase the pitch. Let's have a look at some of the other LFO shapes. We've got two different types of saw, forwards and backwards saws, basically. So what's called saw is a descending sawtooth, and reverse saw is an ascending sawtooth. And what we just heard there gives us an opportunity to talk about the control immediately underneath the shape, the wave shape, where it says free. Because when I pressed that key, we got a little bit of an increasing ramp, and then it very quickly went all the way back down to 0 and started the ramp again. That's because the LFO is currently freely oscillating. It's spinning in the background with not a care in the world, and every time I press a key, I'm jumping onto this train and I'm getting a positive control voltage modulation depending on where it happens to be. Every time I press the note, helps if I only press one note, but you can see that you are hearing a different note each time. If I set it in note mode, now you're going to get exactly the same beginning pitch every single time. Because it always starts drawing the wave, the LFO wave, at the beginning right here. Now that's true at the moment, but we are actually able to change the phase of the low frequency oscillator. In other words, where in the wave's position we begin to draw each wave. And the phase control is this tiny little slider. It's really easy to miss. But when the slider's all the way over at the left hand side, it means every time we start drawing one of these things, start from the beginning. If I move this phase slider to about 50%, it's going to begin drawing the modulation in the middle of the wave, and so we'll hear a bit of a ramp, and then it'll go back to the beginning, and from that point onwards it'll oscillate the entire way every time. And the final kind of evidence to show this is for me to spam a key and move the phase, and you'll hear it move through the wave shape each time I press the note. And here we are at the end of the phase. If you completely invert phase, you basically end up back where you started, and being at the beginning of the wave is exactly the same as being at the end of the wave. Two things are the same. Next up, we have legato. And what this means is that Once I press a note and hold it down, any other notes that I press aren't going to have any impact on the LFO. It's going to carry on from its original source. All those other notes are basically just, again, jumping on the train and picking up wherever the LFO happens to be at. And finally, we've got song position, which will lock the LFO to the underlying song. Obviously, we don't have one playing at the moment, but that's pretty self-explanatory. Just to the right of this control, we've got rate. This is how we speed it up and slow it down. And can you see the rate is in hertz, but if I switch to sync, that's now locking the LFO to the host BPM, and so we're going to get a fraction of whatever the BPM currently is. Then we've got this delay slider. This introduces a period of time before which the LFO will actually start doing anything. So if I increase this to maximum and press a note, can you hear it starts off with absolutely no LFO at all, and then it gradually ramps it up. It doesn't do anything spectacularly, jumping from nothing to full. It gradually introduces the LFO. Deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, until after about 5 seconds we're operating at full depth, whatever that happens to be set to. Finally, we have access to some presets in this little drop-down button. Choose any one of these presets. So if I choose delayed vibrato, now this is going to sound a little bit crazy, but we'll use this to have a bit of a play with it. So completely insane. We're going to deal with our modulation controls in great detail in the next episode, but if I just bring source down and decrease the depth, we get a much gentler effect. And that's a more usable vibrato, and we have that little bit of delay at the beginning that was introduced with the preset. Once we've configured it to our liking, we then have the option to go in and save that preset, and then we have access to it in the box down below. Let's very quickly give you a demo of the other effect we talked about at the beginning of the video, which was tremolo. Instead of playing with pitch course, which we've done up until now, let's switch to amplitude instead. And there we go. Like I said, we'll deal with the modulation section soon. That's just a kind of example of the kind of stuff that we can do with low frequency oscillators. Massively useful tool, completely essential. And now that we've dealt with those two building blocks, I've been asking you for a kind of leap of faith, talking about envelopes and LFOs without diving into the modulation matrix, which is how we tie it all together. And that's what we'll do in the next video. Hope to see you then. Thanks very much for watching.